Hi, I'm Kendra Little, and I'm an evangelist with Redgate software. Today, I'm going to show you how you can set up a project in SQL Change Automation to take a migrations-first approach to database development and how you can hook that up with a project in Microsoft's Azure DevOps. To get started, I have an organization that I've already created in Azure DevOps. And if you check out my screen, you'll see that I actually have more than one organization. And right now, I'm connected to one named RG Demos. Now, RG Demos already has one project in it that's named Demo Code, but for today, I'm going to go ahead and create a new project in the RG Demos organization, and I'm going to name it Northwind because we will be doing demos with the Microsoft Northwind sample database. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in my description. And in the description as well, I am going to go ahead and put a link to where Microsoft publishes this code on GitHub. Microsoft on GitHub, under SQL Server Samples, publishes some scripts for the Northwind and Pub sample databases. We'll be using Northwind today, so I'm going to say download here. Just if you want to download that code yourself, you can get it there. It is published by Microsoft under the MIT license. So they have the copyright for Northwind, but allow others to use it for learning. I'm going to go ahead and make my project visibly public. This means that folks on the internet can see my project. And under this advanced options here, I will be just using the defaults. So I will be using Git for version control. It will automatically create a repo for me in my project using Git. And if I was going to do stuff with work items, I would be using an agile workflow. We'll mostly be looking at version control in this demo. So I'm going to go ahead and create my project there. And once my project is created, I will be able to take a look at it. It automatically takes me into my newly created project. So if we look at our breadcrumb up here, I'm in the RG Demos org in the Northwind project. I could go straight into my repos, but I want to make a change before I do. I'm going to click on this pencil button next to Northwind because I want to be able to have another administrator in my project. I have already added Steve Jones, who's on my team at Redgate. I've already added him into my organization, and I want him to be an administrator in this project, so I'm going to go ahead and add him in now. You don't have to make everyone an administrator, but I trust Steve. He's going to do the right thing. He's going to be a great administrator. So now he has permissions to the project. I can navigate around over here and I can look at all sorts of different things. You could do build pipelines and release pipelines, but the foundation of those things is having some code and source control. So we want to go into the repos. Now that I've clicked on repos, we can see that we have a default repo that has been created for us. Has the same name as our project name. You can create more repos. You can have many repos in your project if you want, but we, for the purposes of this demo, are going to go ahead and use the default Northwind repo that was auto-magically created when I created the project. It says, hey, we don't have any code yet. This is fresh. This is new. To add some code, there's a couple different ways we can do this. There's multiple workflows. They can all work. We could either clone this repository to our local computer, add some code, and then push the code up. Or we can build a repository on our local computer, get our code set up there, and then hook it up with this. Say, hey, here's my local Git repo. There's the one in the cloud up in Azure DevOps. Be friends so I can push things up there. And we have even more options down there. I'm going to go ahead and set things up on my local machine, set up a Git repo there with the code in it that I want, and then I'm going to choose to push that existing repository from the command line. It's not necessarily the only workflow, but I like it, so let's go ahead and do that. I have Visual Studio installed on my local machine. I'll be using a couple of tools on my local machine. I've got Visual Studio with the Redgate tool belt installed. And that means that in Visual Studio, I have a SQL Change Automation window. If I didn't happen to have that open, under the Tools menu in Visual Studio, SQL Change Automation shows up as one of those tools, and I can click it and reopen the window. And there is a Create Project button in there. But first, before I create my project, let's simulate my environment, right? I could be starting out in a bunch of different ways, depending on whether I have a production database already or whether I'm starting an application that's all new and I don't even have any code yet, right? I might be starting out with no code. I might be starting out, let's say that we're starting out with a production database for Northwind, and that we also have an existing development environment, which is only slightly different than the production database. So let's simulate that. Right now, I don't have any databases named Northwind. So we're going to go ahead and use that sample script from Microsoft to simulate this scenario. I'm going to click on inst northwind.sql, this first script on the list. And the Northwind script is large enough that it doesn't just display in the default editor. I need to either click view raw or download to get the script to load because it's a couple thousand lines. But once it loads, I can do Control A, copy it all, and now I've just done Control C and put it on my clipboard. And I'm going to go ahead and put it in SQL Server Management Studio, and I just did Control E to execute it. So what it did is it created a database named Northwind. Let's imagine that in our scenario, let's imagine that Northwind this is not our production instance. I'm connected to my local SQL Server instance, which is named beep beep dev. So let's imagine that this is a restored backup of the production database. But also I have a development environment. So to create the development environment, I'm going to change the script a little bit. I'm going to say, okay, well, at the beginning, there's this line that says I'm going to reset this. So I'm going to drop the database if it exists and recreate it. So I've changed that to Northwind dev. And I'm also going to change the file names that are created here and the database name that is created. There's create database Northwind dev, and it has Northwind dev.mdf and .ldf there. I could also I could change the names here. Let's be a little more detailed. So let's put Northwind dev in everywhere there. And I could change the database options here. And there's an alter database there. And also there is a use statement in here. So this is an old style script. Not everybody uses these double quotes here anymore, right? But this is an old style script. I'm going to say use Northwind dev there as well. So let's go ahead and execute this. I am now creating that database, and there it is. We have Northwind dev if I refresh. All right, but remember I mentioned that our dev database, let's say it's not exactly in sync with production, right? Maybe I have made a change on it in some case. So let's go ahead and let's change the customers table. And we're just going to do something small. We're going to go ahead and create an index, IX, do you see me on, it's poorly named index, dbo.customers. And we will say the key column is city. And then we've got an included column that is postal code there. And now I have this non-clustered index that I have created in Northwind dev that doesn't exist in that restored backup of production, right? Okay, it's a fake restored backup of production there as well. So this is our demo environment that isn't quite in sync with production. So if that's our scenario and that's what we have, when we create this in the new project with SQL Change Automation, we'll want to act in a specific way. So I'm going to go ahead and click Create Project. And it will say, okay, what do you want to create? I'm going to make sure that SQL Change Automation Project is highlighted here at the top because I want to create a migrations first approach to this. And I need to specify what my project is named. I'm going to name it Northwind, and I am naming my solution Northwind as well. I am telling it, hey, create a new Git repo for me. This is my local Git repo. I'm going to have it put the code in my local Git repo that I've said where I want to store it. And then once everything is set up, I can then hook it up with my Azure DevOps Central repo and push my changes up to that. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK here. And that kicks off the wizard that will help me configure my project. The wizard explains, you will set up your project by connecting to a development database. Hey, I've got one of those. And then optionally a deployment target. Well, why is it optional? It's optional because not everybody has a production environment. You might be just starting your code from scratch, or you might have a dev database that's a little ways along, but like nothing's ever been put in production yet. But if you do have a production environment, you do want to specify a deployment target here because we want to know what is the state of production. In other words, what changes are already there so that we don't try to reapply those changes and that we're only applying new things on top of that. So I'm going to click Get Started. And in this wizard, I am going to, on the left, specify my development database. I'm going to specify the connection there. I'm going to say I want Northwind Dev to be on the left. Now, I can edit that connection. If it wasn't already in this list, I would click Browse and then find it. I already have connected to this in the past, so it's already in my list. So we'll say OK there. Now here on the right is the deployment target. This is the optional one. This is a database you plan to deploy to or a restored backup of that database. Not everybody can just say, hey, I want to connect this to the production database. And this can be a little scary if you think it has to be production, right? Because you might think, hey, this is going to deploy something to it. This is going to just read from the deployment target. It's going to say, hey, you will want to deploy to this someday. So I just want to read in the schema for that so I can figure out what does your production environment look like when we get started. So I am going to specify Northwind for that, which represents the backup of production in our case. You can, if you have QA databases as well that you're going to want to deploy to eventually, that's fine too. You can deploy. It's not that you can only ever deploy to this one thing, but we do want to read in what is the state of the production environment because that's important. So I clicked on next there and it just says, this is what I'm going to do. I am going to create a baseline script that represents the schema on the production environment, which in my case is the Northwind database. It will be creating programmable objects for stored procedures, functions, and views. We'll see what those look like too. And if it looks like there's any weird dependency changes that we have to manually resolve, it'll put them in a folder called unsupported. So we may want to look and see, is there a folder named unsupported because there's some work we may need to do. So let's go ahead and click Create Baseline there. So it goes through the process now of reading in from that Northwind database, what is your baseline schema? And it automatically generated in my solution a new folder named 1.0.0.baseline that has a script in there that represents the initial baseline of my project. And if I open that script, I can look through it and read it if I want. It is SQL representing the schema, like I can see, here's the customer demographics table, here's the primary keys, the schema of that Northwind database. I also have a changes folder here for a first set of migration changes that is empty right now. And I have programmable objects that were automatically created for these stored procedures, the views, and we don't have any functions that exist in there. I also have a schema model representing all of the tables, which I only have the DBO schema in that database. I do not have, in this case, an unsupported folder. There is no unsupported folder in View at all here, so everything imported very, very cleanly. Now back in my SQL Change Automation window, I'm going to click Refresh. And what it's doing is it's looking at the Northwind dev database and saying, are there things in the dev database that are different than the baseline schema that we read in from the Northwind database? And sure enough, it says, oh, on the customers table, here's a summary of what's different. there is an index on dbo.customers, and we didn't have that on the schema that I read in from Northwind. So we may want to import, if we want to ship this change to production, we may want to do something with this. But for now, before I do anything with that, I want to go ahead and review. I just click down here on the little pencil that says 38 changes there. And that brings up in Team Explorer a summary of my changes. Remember I told it, hey, create a get repo locally. And I'm in the master branch and I've got my baseline script, I've got my programmable objects, etc. And I'm going to say here in my commit message, I want to go ahead and commit these before I make any changes. I want to say this is my initial baseline and project creation. And I'm going to go ahead and commit all. And it says, hey, you may not want to just use your source control locally. You may want to develop with other people. So maybe you should hook this up with something online. So you can actually do this in the GUI as well. And I can see also for my commit, here is my commit that was created locally and that I haven't synced this with anything at all. The way I want to go ahead and do this is I'm going to open my PowerShell window here, and I'm going to, in my Git directory, I'm going to do dir, and I'm going to now go into the Northwind Git directory there. And I'm going to go ahead and go back to my Azure DevOps window that I had open there. And remember how it had this option that we can push an existing repo from the command line? I'm going to go ahead and copy the code from that because it goes ahead and says, if this is the option you want to do, here is code that will add that as the origin. So I'm going to click and copy that to my clipboard. And now I'm going to go ahead and paste those commands in there. Oh, and it gives me a little error. I'm not exactly deep enough in here. It says, hey, this is not a Git repository. I'm actually up one level. So let's do a dir. Let's go into the Northwind directory itself. And now when I do a dir here, I can see things like the Git attributes file. So now I'm in the right place. So now I'm going to paste those commands in. And I've said, add the origin. Here is your remote repo. And then I said, push everything to the origin. And look, it says, okay, I am doing everything I need to do. Here's the 61 objects, and I'm sending it to this location. And we're initializing the master branch, and master now tracks to master. So we went ahead and pushed it up there. And now, if I refresh the page up here in Azure DevOps, woohoo! We've got our code up here. So I can now look in my baseline folder there and look at the code that's in my baseline. I also, if I want to look at what is the state at this point of these objects, I can say, okay, the sales by year stored procedure. Here is what that looks at like right now. This is just how the code is written. The Northwind database, I'm not saying it's all pretty. And here are the views in my database as well. Well, that's cool. So we've come a long way fast. We've already pushed changes up to our repo. Let's take care of that one last item though. So now in here, if I refresh in here, I have now pushed this up to my remote repo. And when I look at my changes now, locally, it says there's no unstaged changes. And that's because I committed all of the changes that I've made in my developer database. But I do still have this change pending import from my dev database. Now that I have things set up, I want it to be clear that we are no longer working on that Northwind database. When I go to my home screen for SQL Change Automation, I can see down here that the database I'm using, my developer database, is Northwind Dev. And if I want to change that, I can, but we are working off our development database. And the changes that are being found is that index that I added in my development database that wasn't in production. Production being represented by Northwind. So it's saying, hey, you've made some changes in development, and you may want to check these changes and commit them and push them into a pipeline. So let's go ahead and look at that. I have this checked off here, right? And I can say that I want to import this change. This button right here says you want to generate script for all database changes that are pending import. So let's go ahead and generate that script. And here we go. We have a script. It has automatically put this in 1.1.0 changes. This is a migration script. I'm going to minimize my SQL Change Automation window here, and this has my code for this. Now I can change this if I want. This is not a great name. But let's go ahead and go with the terrible name. Let's say that, in fact, I do want it to have this terrible name. This is our first change, so we're going easy. So this is our change that we have now imported. And I'm going to go ahead and close that out there. And if we look now in our offline schema model here, DBO, notice that there is a little check mark next to the customers table. When I imported this, it did more than just create the migration script. Yes, it did create that migration script that says, here is the alter index command that I need to run to add the index to the table. But it also updated the offline schema model that will help represent what is the state of the customers table. So if I open customers.sql, it shows me here is the script for the table creation. Here is the primary key constraint, which is a clustered primary key. And here are all the non-clustered indexes, including the one for IAX, do you see me? So when I did that import, it also updated that online schema model that reflects, hey, what exactly is with this table now? So I'm going to go ahead and open SQL Change Automation. And it's saying, I have added this new script to the project, but there is another step. We should refresh and verify. And this has already been succeeded. What it wants to do, because we can, I could make all sorts of changes to this migration script. It wants to make sure that it runs successfully. And the place that it does that, if I refresh on my beep beep dev instance, there's something that it creates that it maintains. SQL Change Automation maintains this in the background called the shadow database, and it uses that database to help with that verify process. So that verify is completed successfully, now completing my import process. So I clicked import, and then I clicked verify. Well, I want Steve to be able to enjoy my change as well. So I'm going to say my Kendra's delightfully named. Kendra's great at naming indexes. I'm the worst index namer ever, but we're going to go ahead and commit this. And now we're going to go ahead and sync so that we can push this up to the repo so that change goes up there as well. I went ahead and clicked push. And let's go ahead and look in our repo as well and look at our commits and validate that we do see this online in our repo. And sure enough, Kendra really is great at naming indexes. All right, fun times. We will catch up with you soon with more videos, and we're going to have a lot of fun adventures in this Azure DevOps repo. So I hope to see you and Steve in a video soon. I'm Kendra Little, and I'm an evangelist at Redgate. Bye, folks. See you again soon.